Tokyo is an amalgam of condensed urban worlds. Central Tokyo has 14,000 inhabitants per square kilometer. The city itself has 13 million inhabitants. Greater Tokyo has 35 million people within a radius of 50 kilometers. It stretches over 1,000 kilometers, the largest urban center in the world, with Tokyo itself at its heart. Along with Paris, it is one of the least green capitals on the planet. So how can this sprawling city make room for some nature? Yet nature lives on in people's hearts. At the first signs of spring, the crowds parade their spring deities. Though 200 hectares of greenery have disappeared in less than 20 years, nature is still an important feature of everyday life. Each month brings its own celebration. The Azalea Festival, the Maple Tree Festival, the Cherry Blossom Festival. To contemplate for hours the falling cherry blossom is to savor the beauty of the moment and to glimpse how transitory is this world. The cycles of nature remind us that life is short. In Tokyo, they hold nature in their hearts, and more of them seem to want a permanent reminder of it on their skin.
Appreciating the passing of the four seasons makes us more aware. It enriches our emotions, makes us more loving or happy. For the Japanese, the four seasons are not just words or decorations. They reflect our state of mind. Our lives have changed and we're surrounded by technology. But I don't think the change of seasons is any less important to us.
These designs on the skin and from the soul are the outward manifestations of something much deeper. They are traces of Tokyo's predecessor, the lost ideal city, the city of Edo. The ghostly traces of Edo could well be the inspiration for the city of the future. Built in the 16th century, Edo was the first ecological city. At that time, the great shogun, Tokugawa, decided to create a city from scratch. The warlords, the daimyo, had to live there with their families for part of the year in order to control the territory. They would create more than 1,000 beautiful homes with parks and gardens. To win their loyalty, the shogun gave them both gardeners and landscapers.
The old Japanese cities, Edo is a good example, weren't like Paris. Edo was an open land with Edo Castle in the center surrounded by the daimyo, with the properties and gardens. All the open spaces were used for farmland. Irrigation canals were built for rice cultivation. The city had a plentiful water supply and many green spaces. There were 2 million people living there. They even used human excrement as fertilizer for their crops. A truly natural cycle. Around the mountains, nature was very wild, and where the people lived, it was tamed. Man had established a subtle and varied relationship with nature.
During the Edo period, what we now call biodiversity was everywhere.
In the city of Edo, there were wild foxes, wild boars. Animals and birds had enough natural areas to live in large numbers. During the Edo period, people had a lot of pets. Dogs, of course, but some of them had elephants, giraffes, camels, or orangutans.
It was during the Edo period that the Japanese sensitivity to nature was born, and it gave rise to the first urban culture founded on nature. In addition to large gardens, they created sacred places in the city to observe animals and plants, as well as learned societies that shared their knowledge of plants. Horticulture became a true cult. This was when the rites of nature and the yearly celebrations so alive today in Tokyo first took shape. In 1868, Edo ceased to exist. It took a new name, Tokyo. It was the beginning of the Meiji period, an opening up to modernity and the outside world. By 1920, Tokyo had sprawled beyond the borders of the former Edo. The golden age of parks and gardens was over, and many would be destroyed. So what's left of all that nature in today's Tokyo? Behind every row of houses hides a little village that's trying to regain the flowering spirit of Edo. Gardens have always been a much-loved feature of the streets. It's the people's version of guerrilla gardening. There are still a few natural sites in Tokyo dating back to Edo, like Meiji Park, with 120,000 trees right in the heart of the city. A green space that's home to a surprising urban biodiversity. Yuho is one of the very few urban naturalists in Tokyo. He left the comfortable career in advertising to devote himself to the city's animals. He's a champion of urban wildlife. The head gardener guides him to the secret back courtyard of Meiji Park for the first time. He's come to set up camera traps. No camera has ever been set up here before.
This is what's left of a pigeon attacked by a bird of prey. The remains were taken away by a raccoon dog.
Yuho patiently picks out the most likely spots for passing wildlife. A week later, Yuho analyzes his images. Wild animals living in a major city amidst a population of 15,000 inhabitants per square kilometer. A civet, a macaque, and a bizarre creature called a tanuki, a curious mixture of dog and raccoon. In the Edo culture, the tanuki was the yokai, the spirit of the forest, who brought good luck. Finding it right in the middle of Tokyo shows that the wildlife is thriving.
Many people, including Tokyoites, see Tokyo as a megacity and reckon there can't be much wildlife. In fact, the city has lots of rivers and ponds, and they're home to about 200 species of wild birds. Recently, mammals have even returned to the city, and in large numbers, too. I consider it my role to speak to all those people who don't believe there's any wildlife in Tokyo, and help them discover all the animals and other wildlife that's here. It's we Japanese who've destroyed nature to build up the city, so we shouldn't be the first to give up on it. The way I see it, as long as the animals keep struggling to live here, we must make an effort to get to know them better.
There is wildlife living here in the nooks and crannies of the city. But in the heart of a city which in less than half a century has destroyed an exceptional natural heritage, it's a precarious existence. How was the thread broken? Why couldn't Tokyo hang on to more than a few square meters of green space? Because it had other problems to deal with. After the war, the priority was to restart the economic recovery at all costs. Urban planning projects were set aside, as was nature itself.
Back then, Tokyo had just one obsession, the economic boom. The economy was growing at an incredible rate. The priority was economic development and our standing in the international arena. Don't forget, we'd just lost a war.
During the years of high growth, Tokyo's environment was destroyed, the scenic landscapes swallowed up by industrial development. They even planned to fill in the bay. One man who joined the post-war struggle against the total destruction of Tokyo Bay was Kazutoshi Ono. As a child, Ono could run for 4 kilometers along the beach to the sea. All that was filled in. Apart from 1 sandbank and 2 little fishing ports. And all because Ono refused to sell the fishing rights for Funabashi to the concrete contractors. He presented his case to Parliament. He won and saved a section of the coast. Folks started calling him the Robert Redford of the Bay.
At the time, 1973, a project to fill in the area had already been agreed on and was going ahead. The Funabashi Fishing Cooperative had closed a deal for 9 billion yen. But I found it unacceptable. So I said we should return the money.
Despite Ono's efforts to save a bit of seacoast, the bay, which had been the pride of Edo, was sacrificed on the altar of expansion. Tokyo turned its back on its nature, but nature itself was to contribute to its own destruction. In Tokyo, natural disasters are never far off. There are regular hurricanes and typhoons, added to which every 70 years on average, it is struck by a very strong earthquake. 1855, the Edo fire, 10,000 dead. 1896, the Munji Sandriku earthquake, 20,000 dead. 1923, the Kanto earthquake, 200 dead in Tokyo.
Japan is surrounded by several tectonic plates. The Pacific Plate, the Eurasian Plate, the Philippine Sea Plate, and the North American Plate. And as luck would have it, these 4 plates meet where Japan is located. As a result, the country often experiences earthquakes, typhoons, landslides, and tsunamis. People have to learn to live with these disasters. In fact, cohabitation and resignation are ways of thinking that are firmly rooted in the Japanese spirit.
Coexisting also means being prepared. There are more and more training drills using the dozen earthquake simulators in Tokyo.
The peak of an earthquake usually lasts for about a minute.
Training drills are needed more than ever now. In Tokyo, the probability of the big one, the major disaster, will increase by 70% over the next 30 years, according to the government. Nature gives a lot, and often takes it back. Everyone accepts that's the rules of the game. On March 11th, 2011, everything changed. The whole city shook. No simulator had prepared it for this. 230 kilometers north of Tokyo, an earthquake measuring 9 on the Richter scale triggered a tsunami. $300,000 evacuees. Coastal towns devastated. 3 nuclear reactors at the Fukushima power plant badly hit. A chain explosion was expected, which could be the end of Tokyo. Evacuation of the city was seriously considered. Why was a nuclear plant built so close to a fault line? Why had they not anticipated and assessed the extent of the risks? The tragedy brutally brings to light the irresponsibility of political power. But protesting is not the Japanese way. No more fatalism this time, though. The Japanese had started to ask questions.
The citizens hardly protested at all against the politicians. And I found that very surprising. Such passivity, only in Japan.
Some, however, tried to do something about it and tried to bring about more serious change. The artist-activist 281 Anti-Nuke is one of them. Nuclear power is still such a taboo subject that he doesn't dare speak openly. He has received death threats on the social networks.
This terrible disaster has overwhelmed me. But most of all, it's brought out my doubts concerning the Japanese government. I've become suspicious of the country and the government. I think this is really the time for all Japanese who up to now had confidence in the government to change their way of thinking. I collect information that hasn't been released by the government or the media for the maximum number of people, so everyone can think freely about it. That's my goal.
Artists, intellectuals, mothers, a fringe of the population is starting to be heard, even if its voice is weak compared to the gravity of the situation. The atmosphere may not be conducive to protest, but Fukushima has awakened consciences. In Tokyo, they accept the laws of nature, but they want to put an end to systematic destruction at the hand of man. Destruction that might have meant the end of Tokyo. Everyone knows how urgent it is to rebuild a harmonious relationship with nature, because in Tokyo, an ecological crisis too is not far away. The megacity is so mineral-based that it generates its own climate. Buildings store heat and block the wind. Temperatures have risen 3 degrees in 100 years, more than in any other capital. The powerful computers at the Jamstack Institute are hurriedly simulating this urban climate change.
This image shows the heat distribution. The red shows the areas with high temperatures. In the green areas, the temperatures are lower. The number of buildings has increased, and the green spaces have decreased. If the vegetation is increased, we can reduce this phenomenon. Green spaces will help the city retain water and, by evaporation, lower the air temperature.
The islands of warmth are accompanied by a new phenomenon. In Tokyo, they call them guerrilla rainstorms. Like gorillas, they strike without warning and drown the capital in more than 100 millimeters of water per hour. At Tokyo City Hall, they're fighting back, at least against the flooding. The city has dug 5 huge concrete silos under the rivers as flood runoffs. Each one could accommodate the space shuttle. They are all connected by an underground channel 6 kilometers long that empties into the largest of them.
In the heavy rains, the water level has risen up to there.
This silo is able to pour 200 cubic meters per second into the Edo River, the equivalent of an Olympic swimming pool. This monumental technological feat will prevent real catastrophe, but how to deal with the roots of the problem? Today, Tokyo has its back to the wall. The city has urgently to reinvent itself. The politicians know it, and they're all issuing competing statements. Their goal is to make the capital the leading green city of 2050, with ample green spaces, 1 million trees planted, with 20% renewable energy by 2020, and by increasing anti-seismic devices tenfold. After Fukushima, all green projects are on the rise.
Currently, we are reconsidering our relationship with nature and how we create cities. By 2020, when we host the Olympics, our goal is to increase Tokyo's green spaces by 1,000 hectares. Rivers, roads, and parks will all be brought together in a large green area, a vast nature trail, to make Tokyo a city teeming with greenery. We're capable of reconstructing a city like Edo, which was a true model of a garden city.
The garden city is still far off, but the seeds have already been sown in the most amazing places. Seen from the sky, Tokyo has begun to look colorful. It's a good sign. In the Roppongi Hill district, the real estate giant Mori has planted an extraordinary garden.
We're planting the very best rice and beans. It's the first time we've tried this experiment. I'm excited and a bit worried. Where I live, this rice grows in rice paddies. But here, we're up on the roof at Roppongi Hill. I'm happy and I'm anxious. It feels strange.
Tokyo City Hall now requires these green roofs on all large structures with the aim of creating more than 1,200 hectares of green roofs in 10 years and reducing the heat given off by 1 degree. The Generation 2.0 kids are putting their Nintendos down for a while as the rice masters pass on their knowledge. A landscape of rice paddies on the roofs. This poetic and political event is proof of the movement taking place in Tokyo. Everybody now wants to be surrounded by nature. They're all seeking stronger ties to the natural world. They rent dogs by the hour just to be with an animal. They meet in bars to pet cats, look in the parks for insects to raise in their homes. A 4-hour commute every day, 1 week off a year, working till 9 p.m., armies of employees in gray suits, all looking to nature in order to breathe. From time to time, they come to Ichibaya on the Kanda River for a break, to try to get back in touch with real life. The fish has to be put back in the water, so it can be caught again a bit later by another man in a suit. The municipality is full of ideas to satisfy this need for nature. On Sundays, people flock to Tokyo's last natural beach. First of all, Mr. Udo measures the radioactivity.
I measure the level of radioactivity in the air to make sure it isn't too high and that there's no danger. Here it's 0.038, so I can inform City Hall that the radioactivity level in the air is not dangerous. There'll be a lot of visitors here tomorrow and they won't have to worry.
Today in Tokyo, radioactivity measurements have leveled off. Starting at 9 a.m., tens of thousands of Tokyoites flock to the 600 meters of concrete-free beach to hunt for clams. To dig in the black sand, to splash in the water, to go looking for shells. You're a beachcomber for a day, and the city seems far away.
These clams come from China. There aren't any more clams in Kyushu, or with last year's rains and tides. So they bring in clams from China and bury them in the mudflats. When you buy them, though, you still say they're from Kyushu.
It may look artificial, but it makes people happy. These days, more and more of them want nature that's real and tangible. They're aware that the fate of their city depends on it. Thousands of Tokyoites now come together for a specific goal: to save a forest, a river, even a tree. The most striking example is the Sayama Forest, a natural green space of 3,500 hectares that is constantly being eaten away by dormitory suburbs. A major conservation issue in Tokyo, this forest was saved from destruction by the Totoro Foundation. Totoro is a manga character, a forest spirit that director Miyazaki first dreamed up in the Sayama Forest. Totoro has 1,500 volunteers who roll up their sleeves and give both time and money to preserve and maintain the forest. Today they're cutting the bamboo that has been smothering part of their precious forest.
For those of you who are new, it'll only last 2 hours, but it'll be exhausting. So pace yourselves, otherwise you won't want to come back.
Totoro is protecting this plot of land. When I was a boy, there was a lot of forest, but now, 30 years later, there's just this plot here. We really have to conserve nature.
Tokyo's just concrete now. The earth has disappeared. It's become a concrete jungle. Nature has disappeared. Yes, Tokyo's become a concrete jungle. We'll get green spaces back in the city again little by little, plot by plot.
This forest is part of a key landscape feature of Japan, the Satoyama. It's the traditional Japanese countryside at its most graceful, a mixture of forest, rice paddies, and bamboo. The Japanese had forgotten this image of rural Japan. Miyazaki's film brought it back to them. A deep nostalgia has gripped Tokyo for these idyllic surroundings, destroyed by the urban sprawl of the 1980s. For their part, naturalists like Kawakami have discovered, to everyone's surprise, that the Satoyama has a biodiversity even richer than that of a wild forest.
We're still in Tokyo here. The Satoyama is not a natural environment untouched by man. On the contrary, it's one that's been regularly used by humans, but in a positive way, such as in this valley, which has been converted to create rice paddies, or even here, where they've cut down trees for firewood. It's a natural environment that's been skillfully managed in order to preserve it as long as possible. 50 years ago, you found this kind of landscape in the Tokyo suburbs. Nowadays, there are only 2 or 3 places like it left in Tokyo.
The Satoyama is an example of the intelligent management of nature's gifts, a harmonious model and one that Kawakami fights for. This man has cleared the edges of the forest, digging rice paddies, reed beds, ditches, clearings, a mosaic where biodiversity flourishes.
I took a broad census of the rare species that live in every corner of this area. Then I gathered all the data in a report that I sent to the people responsible for planning how to manage this ecosystem.
Kawakami has saved Tokyo's last Satoyamas. This sustainable landscape of the future has become the emblem of people's aspiration for a greener city. The word has become a concept. Everything is Satoyama now. In 2010, the term even made it to the major biodiversity conference forums. The Japanese launched the Satoyama Initiative to identify and protect natural environments around the world. People even dream of a global Satoyama, a future model for the planet.
This shows a place that was in the heart of Tokyo called Ochiai, where lots of people came to watch the fireflies. Today it's all built over, but it used to be a natural environment, very much like the Satoyama, where people would get together simply to enjoy themselves. The firefly is like a barometer for the quality of the natural environment. I think we should try to bring the fireflies back to Tokyo. That's a challenge for people trying to restore a natural, healthy environment in the city.
Pollution has driven away the fireflies. The Japanese want them back, though. To call them back, they celebrate the Firefly Festival. These ones are electric, but the will is there to give them back a place in a city that's waking up to environmental issues. As with the Satoyamas, people are trying to save the last farms in the greater Tokyo area. This, too, is a major issue. These green spots on the gray checkerboard of Tokyo are farms and allotments. There are 10,000 of them in greater Tokyo, gradually being enveloped in an urban straitjacket. Historian and agronomist Shinji Isoya protects this 2% of agricultural land, the clearings in the concrete jungle. He creates vegetable gardens and still dreams of Edo and its balance between nature and the city.
When I was a child, I lived in a farming community in the Fukui countryside. And although I grew up in a city, this rural experience taught me just how rich and meaningful agriculture is to our lives. The planted seed sprouts, the leaves bud, the flowers bloom, and the fruit ripens. Nature allows us to live and see our children grow. For me, that's how you learn the value of life. So it seemed obvious to me that we absolutely had to protect these lands. Agricultural lands located in the city have several functions. They protect the environment, moderate the climate, absorb rainwater that then evaporates into the air. They're places of refuge in natural disasters. In my book, The Age of Agriculture, I say the 20th century saw the countryside urbanized, but the 21st century should see the cities ruralized. In large companies, 10% of the employees suffer from depression. A new phenomenon has appeared in schools, bullying. All this is due to our separation from nature, and little by little, we're starting to understand that.
In Tokyo, they've revived the spirit of Satoyama. It has become the standard bearer, leading nature back into the city. They've mobilized to save their agricultural heritage. For the first time, an environmental policy incorporates both green and blue belts, although this still may not be enough for a city of 13 million inhabitants. But Tokyo, like all megacities, faces the problem of lack of space. It seems, though, to have found an original solution. Tokyo has developed a genius for acquiring the one commodity the entire world is fighting for: space. In the 1970s, betting on its continued expansion, it increased its number of vacant lots. Today, they occupy a total of 4,600 hectares. Tomorrow's Green Tokyo may arise from them. Flying over Tokyo Bay and noticing one of these abandoned lots, Tadao Ando, Japan's star architect, came up with a great idea: to build a forest on the sea. He thinks it'll help cool Tokyo down.
I'm building the sea forest through donations on a garbage dump. 500,000 people have donated money to transform an old landfill into a green space. When it's complete, you'll be able to go all the way to the Imperial Palace by way of Tokyo Bay and Tokyo Station. A city is a living thing. It swells, it retracts, it's constantly evolving. And that's where nature comes in. And man's a part of that too. I think Tokyo, compared to all the other cities of the world, is the most active, the most dynamic. Above all, we mustn't forget that we have to preserve nature, because it's the heart of it all.
On these vacant lots, Tokyo built a forest, but also entire neighborhoods, such as Odaiba with its artificial beach. Over the past 20 years, an archipelago of 450 hectares of coastal parks, planted walking paths, and even a small bird sanctuary have been created. Of the 54 parks originally planned, 36 have already been completed. The people of Tokyo now have the access to the sea that industry had taken away from them. Today, advances into the sea continue, but are hampered by the problem of waste management, which Tokyo doesn't know how to deal with. The city consumes as much of it as it can by excreting it onto other landfilled areas. A layer of garbage, then of mud, and another cake awaits its concrete icing. Tokyo produces over 4 million tons of waste each year. More than the landfills can absorb, more than the bay can swallow. What is to be done? To solve the problem, City Hall created Super Eco Town, a complex of pilot plants with a mission, a holy grail, to achieve ultimate recycling. From pollutants to mattresses, nothing is thrown away. Everything must be reused. This is the principle of industrial ecology. From waste, it produces energy, materials, and even food for animals. This is City Hall's great project, for Tokyo to become a zero-waste city.
Of course, a city, like a human being, is alive. It may not be a pleasant comparison, but if a city doesn't manage its waste, it's dirty and goes into decline. The cities that disappeared in the past were the ones that didn't manage their waste.
People come from all over the world to visit the model factory, which recycles 3,500 futons a day and can turn a mountain of garbage into a cupful of dust. But Tokyo still has work to do. In 2010, it recycled 25% of its garbage, far short of its goal of zero waste, but much better than Paris with 6% and New York with 15%. Everything recycled to infinity. It's one of the founding principles of the city of tomorrow, the smart city. It's not just about more green spaces here and there, a few marginal adjustments. It's about rethinking the whole picture. The smart city withstands disasters, manages its energy, is self-sufficient. It's a kind of ideal bubble that stands the test of time and earthquakes. Tokyo is seriously thinking about this, because the city is under pressure like no other metropolis. By coming up with multiple solutions, it expects to meet its ambitions of becoming a sustainable city. In Chiba, in the western suburbs, the changes have already begun, like a dress rehearsal on a small scale.
Here we're into all the concepts that combine nature with everyday life and technology, and we try to move forward with that in mind. For example, right here we're building an urban center. There will be greenery everywhere in the infrastructures. We're trying to tame nature. We're also trying to use renewable energies to move closer to more traditional Japanese thinking that has for centuries sought harmony with the natural world. And to actually create right here a smart city that we can pass on to future generations.
So welcome to the paradise city of tomorrow, which even calculates energy expenditures and can connect with other cities in case of breakdowns. The intelligent city can't work without agriculture, smart agriculture, of course. Dr. Toyoki Kozai is the inventor of the plant factory, which aims to make the city of tomorrow self-sufficient. Every year, its greenhouses produce 3 million heads of lettuce, all treated with carbon dioxide.
Plants improve their rate of photosynthesis when they have a lot of carbon dioxide. That's why we recover carbon dioxide from the Tokyo Gas Company to use in our vegetable factories.
The plant factory operates at any level, industrial or individual. Everyone can have their own factory at home.
For city people, it's difficult to grow plants in a true natural setting. With these techniques, we want to help children, adults, or the elderly to grow their own plants so they feel good and in contact with nature. The environment is artificial, but the plant is natural. Bonsai are also natural plants that are artificially cultivated. We don't consider them to be artificial plants. We see them as miniature representations of the universe. I know this is a very oriental way of seeing things.
The government has invested billions of yen in research into the smart city. 5 smart cities are planned in partnership with private groups. Prototypes of a better world, or just real estate with a new green look. In any case, the city of the future in all its forms is now up for tender. In Tokyo, nature today isn't just about contemplation and philosophy. It's at the heart of new urban strategies that veer from nostalgia to futurism, from Satoyama to smart cities. It's nature that's at the heart of all the many proposals that are all ultimately seeking the same alchemical fusion of high-tech and tradition. Famous botanist, trendy garden designer, green furniture maker, and aspiring rock star, Makoto Azuma is the model citizen of the city of the future.
I want to use all the techniques that have been developed since the Edo period and still keep a fresh style. There's a Japanese expression, onko shishen, which means, by knowing the old, we know the new. That's why I study the traditions of the past carefully, so I can break with them and create something new.
His art is a synthesis of past and future. He gives quite a facelift to the traditional Japanese bouquet.
It's a contemporary interpretation, which I do by creating gardens and landscapes, or by interior decorating with plants. I'd like people, when they see my work, to be enthralled with the plants, to have their curiosity stirred. Whatever their reactions, I believe my job is to sow the seeds of plants in the hearts of people.
In his little electric car, Makoto, the mutant botanist, is firmly on the road to the Edo of the third millennium. In this case, the designer version. Big bosses of construction, the same ones who blithely concreted over 95% of the bay, have revised their script. It's a bit more flowery now. These days, they dream of floating cities out there in the bay, with farms in them too. Meantime, in that same bay, for the first time in 50 years, the anglers are back with their little ladders. They're trying to catch raze, a rare and delicious fish that has come back to the bay, a sure sign that the water's cleaner now. This is fishing as practiced by the samurai, a kind of fencing with the horizon, from Edo to the city of tomorrow.